Welcome to Electric Evolution with Liz Allan. This podcast explores the transition to net zero and the systems driving real change in how we move, live and power our world. Every week I sit down with the people leading that change, those offering insight, innovation and impact in many ways people don't fully see until they hear their stories. If you're ready for real conversations that inspire action and drive change, please like this video, subscribe to the channel and join us on this journey, and let's cut through the noise and build a better future together. So on today's episode I have with me Euan Macleod, and he's the head of commercial at a company called VOQA. So Euan, thank you ever so much for talking to me, and we've tried to have this session a little while and I wasn't very well last time, was I? So thank you ever so much.
Liz, better late than never, and delighted I could be with you today.
So let's start off a little bit about kind of your journey and what led you into kind of the EV space and working in a company like VOQA.
Anyone who looks at my LinkedIn profile doesn't see sustainability or EV charging. In fact, what you see is 25, if not broadly 30 years of telecommunications expertise. I guess like most people who came out the back of university, it was a fairly well-worn path. Find a graduate scheme to get into and join a big corporate, and then, you know, have 20 different jobs over 20 different years, which I did. And, you know, I had a great time doing it. Telecoms is a great industry to be in. I've worked for some very large companies, had exposure to all sorts of different things. But I guess I got to a point, two things happened really. Well, you know, about 5 years ago, I kind of got a bit fed up with the corporate culture. Nothing wrong with it, but I'd just been through, you know, the washing machine too many times, and I felt that I needed to think about doing something different. I've also got two boys, both teenagers. In fact, they were just becoming teenagers 5 years ago. And they would ask me what I did, and it became very difficult to explain what I did. It was a bit esoterical. You know, I did some marketing work, I did some sales work, I did some engineering work. But telecoms as a concept, you know, beyond the fact that they know what a mobile phone is, was a bit difficult for them. So I decided to look for a smaller business to work for. And I definitely wanted to do something that was a bit more purpose-driven. So, you know, the buzzword at the time, in fact, it still is sustainability. Mm-hmm. So, you know, partly by planning and then partly by a big dose of luck and my network of people that I've met over the years, I find myself looking at EV charging and joined ChargePoint 4 years ago now, thereabouts. And, you know, wasn't quite sure what I was joining, you know, an EV charger. I mean, surely that's just a bit of electrical technology you stick on a wall. But actually, very quickly, you understand how pivotal EV charging is in the transition that we're going to make to EVs. And it's a high growth market, you know, broadly. Every EV needs to be charged somewhere, be it at home or be it en route or be it at a destination. And so the growth rates in this industry are remarkable. But it was also quite a new industry. I know ChargePoint's been around since, you know, probably the best part of 20 years now, but actually it's kind of a market that was just getting going. It was relatively new. And then 9 months ago, I had the opportunity to join a startup in the same industry, VOQA. I think ChargePoint wasn't big, but maybe bigger than I wanted it to be. So I joined a team of what's probably about 20 in total, who are working on building a destination AC charger that will launch, you know, shortly, is the plan. So I'm very happy, kind of, I guess, towards the tail end of my career. But, you know, I caught myself saying the other day, I wish I'd found startup world 10 years ago, because actually it's a huge amount of fun. You work with people with a huge amount of passion. Yes, you've introduced me as head of commercial, but frankly, I also look at go-to-market. I also do all the customer-facing activity. You know, I'm also deeply involved in the service proposition. You know, small groups of people have just got to do lots of different things. And actually, with 30 odd years of work experience, you know, I've got a lot of things I hope I can bring to the table. So, yeah, having a great time.
So VOQA, though, the background to VOQA is, yes, it's a startup.
Yeah.
But it's not quite it's not a startup in the way that my business was a startup. Do you want to just explain a little bit about the players who are kind of behind it?
Yeah, so we run it with a startup mentality, I think is the thing to say. But VOQA is actually part of a stable of investments that are focused on payment transactions in public sector or public transportation environment. So KubaPay and VIX are probably the two largest in the stable. There's also LittlePay, which is a payment service provider. And they've got a depth of expertise in managing payments. We've moved a huge distance from the days where you'd put your 50 pence in the machine and you get a paper ticket to do a journey, and then to do the next leg of the journey you'd have to do the same and the same and the same. I guess a lot of people will be familiar with Oyster. I mean, that's not associated with Kuba or VIX, but for example, in Manchester, the B network, all the kind of tap on, tap off the buses is all done, and the trams is all done by VIX and Kuba. So we come from a world where complex open payment systems is a thing that they're expert in. And I know you're going to ask me the question, but how do you get from managing payments into building an EV charger? If you're an EV driver, you probably care about three things. Once you've got the car, can I find a charger? Can I start a charger, and then can I pay for it when it's done? And Aaron Ross, who's the CEO of all the business groups, is a long-term EV driver, and his view is that EV charging just needs to be simpler. So it was born of frustration, really. And so on the basis that managing payments is a critical component of a driver experience, let's build an EV charger around what we're really good at. So our intellectual property is the payment, and then we've built on that. We've picked our segment of the EV charging market, destination charging, and that's what we're building. So yes, we have a startup mentality, but we have some parents who are helping us with intellectual property, and so we work quite cross-functionally across VOQA, which is an even smaller team than 20, it's just 4 of us, into the wider organisation where we're designing and building the charger.
So you're talking about, it's destination charging. What speeds specifically are you keeping to 7 kilowatts or 7 and 22, or what are you looking at?
We're going to build a dual boat charger that can deliver up to 22 kilowatts.
Okay.
Clearly, and you'll know this, and others listening to this podcast will know, the amount of capacity, the amount of charge you can deliver at a charger is very dependent on available electrical supply, which is never given in any project. But, and what you would choose is very dependent on the use case. I mean, we're focused on destinations, so places people want to be, rather than places they have to go to get a charge. So be it a hotel, be it a leisure facility, be it a long stay car park, be it workplaces, which I think is a really critical component of the transition to EV. You pick your speed based on what the use case looks like. So if you're a hotel, frankly, you just need low speed charging. The car's going to be parked typically for 8 to 10, if not 12 hours overnight, and actually probably doesn't need a full recharge, just needs a top up. But if it's a shorter dwell time location, maybe a leisure facility, which you're just going to spend a couple of hours, then 22 or 11 kilowatts, because most cars on AC charge at 11. I know Renault have made some statements about moving to 22 across our platform, but that's more. And I think we need to change our mindset. I've driven a diesel and petrol vehicle for my entire life until actually quite recently. And you do just get to the point where you let it drip to zero, and then you go and have a one-off visit to a petrol station, you fill it up, and you go off on your day's journey. And that's kind of the reality most of us are used to. And we are asking, people will have to change their understanding of how to fuel a vehicle. Yes, you could go to, run your battery down and then go to a big charging hub and wait to get it refueled. It will probably, I know speeds are getting faster, battery technology is improving. Or you could just top it up as you go. My mobile phone's sitting here. In fact, there is a charging cable, and I'll plug it in. It doesn't need a charge, I'll just plug it in. And that's the same kind of philosophy for destination charging. You'll drive somewhere, you'll plug it in, you'll get some range added to your battery, you'll go off. So you're kind of perpetually just topping up your battery. So that top-up mentality is a thing that will become prevalent. But that's the change, essentially, people are going to have to make in how they think about how they fuel their vehicle.
So you, like you just said, you kind of moved to electric fairly recently, didn't you? Do you want to just, and we'll come back to the product in a little while, but do you want to just give a bit of an a kind of a brain dump of what your experience has been. You know, kind of why did you? I know which car you've got.
Oh, right, I'll take
And I
I'll
know what
live
you.
with
I
it.
know you've moved. I know what you've moved to. What were your thought? What was your thought process before you moved to electric?
So maybe just a brief step back. So think about today in the UK. There's about 33 million vehicles on the road, I think roughly, of just passenger transportation. Ignore your HGVs and maybe to some extent light commercial vehicles. 33 million vehicles, of which 1.5 million are EV. So actually, despite the fact it feels like we've been talking about EVs forever, we're still right at the very beginning, about 5% of cars. Um, and so to move to an EV now means you're still an early adopter. And actually, we've got some time before we get into mass market, and maybe we'll talk about the challenges of mass market as we move forward in the podcast. So I was always of a view that my next car would be an EV. I didn't feel the need to go and change it. One, because as I said, I worked at ChargePoint. You know, I'm not embarrassed to say that all the time I was at ChargePoint, I drove a diesel Mercedes. It was a perfectly good
Does make me
car.
chuckle. I'm sorry, but I get you. I get you, and I don't think you're the only one who's working
Yeah,
for a CPO kind of drives a
you know, and it
non-electric
wasn't,
vehicle.
you know, my perspective, it wasn't a case of resistance to change. Actually, I did want to change, but I had a perfectly good car
Mm,
that I paid for. Why would I change it? And so I didn't. What swung it for me was coming to VOQA. You know, I now have, I can charge at home. I should declare that I do drive a Tesla. So two things that, you know, bring some advantages to making that transition to EV.
mm,
But I needed a car. I suddenly saw the economic case for moving. You know, I'm now driving 15,000 miles a year.
mm.
You don't need to be a super whiz kid at an Excel spreadsheet to start figuring out that there's some significant savings on going electric, particularly if you can charge from home. And so I made the switch. And frankly, the premium that the vehicle cost me is more than offset by the savings I make on fuel, I make on, well, servicing. There is no servicing. Um, I actually, I've thoroughly enjoyed the experience. I think I wrote a post on LinkedIn a few weeks back where I said I'd pulled up behind a really souped up Mercedes, as it happens, you know, big tailpipes out the back going vroom vroom. And I was kind of waiting for that moment of envy and jealousy to kick in, thinking, I wish I had that car. Well, I just didn't. You know, as far as I was concerned, I was in the better car. I was happy with my choice. So, you know, I'm one of the 95% who say they'll never go back. And it was surprising to me how quickly I felt that. It was also surprising, you know, I did have, the first time I drove from where I lived to Bristol, which is 100 miles, I did have range anxiety. Even though the car said I had 300 miles on the clock, I did have that
Yeah,
instant
I
of
get you.
range anxiety. And by the way, I work in the charging industry, so I know more than a lot of people. It's a human instinct, and you know, I don't blame anyone from having that. But I'd driven the car for about a week, and all of a sudden I just forgot. You know, it's just driving a car. So it's been a good experience for me. And one, I, I'm not disappointed it took me longer to make it, but I made it at the right time and it was right for me. And that's kind of, if people are thinking about EV, you know, do it at the right time for you. No one's forcing anyone to switch. Certainly not least of all me. So there you go. So yeah, thoroughly good example.
No, I was going to say. I mean, yeah, no one's forcing them yet, and I'm not saying that I don't like the word forcing. And actually, when it comes down to it, we need to reduce, you know, emissions, not just carbon emissions, but you know, kind of air pollution, and we need to reduce that, don't we?
Well, I
So,
think
so that's really important. And look what you're doing, and look what I'm doing, and not trying to go into smug mode, you know, but that's kind of
no,
important.
far from it. I think I saw something you posted a few weeks back about, or reposted about the number of deaths that are associated with air pollution. You know, so sustainability and, you know, new transportation options aside, actually, you know, I've got young kids. I've also got elderly parents. You know, the thought of improving their lives by reducing pollution has got to be a big driver in a lot of people's thinking. I'm sure a lot of that's kind of hidden from view, but you know, pollution is a silent killer.
Exactly, and people don't actually realise that when they're little kids who are in reception, year one, year two, whatever, they're only little and they're walking behind all the cars parked up outside of school that have got their engines running. What are they all breathing in? But the little ones are all at tailpipe height, aren't they? Which just if you think about it, that's pretty grim. It's, so we need to do something about it. But look, I'm not going to harp on about that. Let's go back to what you've just been saying. So actually, do you know what? I want to talk about something that you said to me about what your CEO looked at EV charging and thought this could be easier and better. And your goal at VOQA is to make EV charging effortless. Just let me know, tell me about what that looks like in practice. What do you see that looking like?
I I and actually the person who runs the team here, Becky Lilani, we often have the conversation that people say, well, hasn't all this been sorted and actually EV charging's there and it's really easy to use? And, you know, yes and no. Everyone will have read somewhere about concerns about reliability of EV charging infrastructure. I think reliability is an issue, and as we've talked about before, later on this year we're going to get the first set of mandatory reporting from CPOs about the reliability status. I think that's in November, so it's going to be interesting to see what comes from that, and we'll take it
as they have to self-report, which is like marking your own homework, but hey, that's another conversation.
We'll see. I think, and as I've already said, I drive a Tesla, so actually a different charging experience from many. And actually, bear in mind, I charge mostly at home. If I drive beyond the range of my battery, I'm charging at a Tesla station. So I very rarely have to find a station that's not Tesla. So I think when we first came across one another, I'd posted some observations about my experience. So I purposefully went in the local area to where I live to find stations that were advertised as contactless, with contactless payment, to find out what the non-Tesla driver experience, or in fact the EV driver experience looked like. And let's just say it wasn't as easy as it should be. You know, cables or not cables is your preference. I don't have a particular issue personally about getting my own cable out, but there'll be certain parts of the population where that is a challenge. What surprised me was the quality of the contactless payment. Either it didn't work, wouldn't start a charge, would accept one brand of card but not the other, and vice versa. Was advertised as accepting contactless, but from a driver who was next to me would only accept an RFID card. So it was quite variable, and while it was never positioned as kind of we're going to do a statistical survey on how many, the performance of chargers, it was there as well, if we're pushing effortless charging, has this problem been solved? And in a couple of sessions over, 5 or 6 hours, just driving around randomly trying to find chargers, we found actually it was quite poor. And so actually I'm still encouraged that, I'm discouraged that there's a bad experience out there, because when someone has a bad experience, it changes their behaviour. But I'm encouraged that our mission around, or our vision around effortless charging is still valid. Clearly we're going into the ground now, we have some test units, we'll be running a pilot, and, time will tell whether we've got it right or not. But I come back to only a small proportion of drivers have made the change to EV in the grand scheme of things. And so there's a whole population of people who will have anxiety, have some concerns, just not have sufficient knowledge about what that means for them. But if I can walk into a coffee shop and buy a cup of coffee with a credit card, why can't I simply turn up at an EV charging station and use a credit card? Now, I know the regulations from last year have mandated that, certainly in the world of AC, 22 kilowatt chargers, above 8 kilowatts needs to have contactless payment. Good news, but execution needs to be better, which would be my finding. Yeah. I still think there's a place for not excluding below 8 kilowatts. If you think hotels, frankly, they shouldn't be installing. I would say 7 kilowatts is an ideal range for them to be charging overnight, if not 3.5 kilowatts. Why can't they have a contactless credit card? So I think there's more work to be done. Good news is, we're on a mission to make it easy. Cables, contactless credit card, no apps, no memberships, no sign-ups. You just simply arrive, you tap your card, you plug it in, and off you go and do whatever you're going to do on the day.
And you went to an event recently, didn't you? She's Electric. We were talking about this before we started recording, and you were saying about people's thoughts on charging. what were the main things, or even just like having, an EV and the charging,
Yeah.
the whole situation? What were your thoughts on that one? What came out most?
So why did I go?
Mm,
50% of drivers, give or take a few percentage points, are women. And so, if we're claiming to provide an effortless charging experience, we've got to make sure we're taking a broad set of views about what effortless charging really looks like.
mm,
The event, and so I turned up. I kind of knew I was going to be in the minority, but actually I was the only male in the room. So I just dug in, listened hard. I was made to feel welcome. It was a great day in a beautiful location. I would say lots of, and maybe to some extent, the audience was self-selecting. It was advertised as an EV day, so but nevertheless, a lot of passion and enthusiasm in the room about making the transition to EV. I think from a EV car perspective, things I picked up were it can feel like quite a technical sale sometimes,
mm,
I guess,
mm.
particularly if you're buying a new car. And I know you and I have talked about actually, is there even an effective means for dealerships to be selling EVs in the first place? I know it's quite a broad experience.
Oh
Um,
yes.
yeah. The fact that, I remember this and I hate this too, but you're trying to negotiate a price and the salesman scampers off to a back office to have a chat about a better price. You're left not quite feeling whether you've got a good deal or not. You generally find that you've not. So transparent pricing was a big thing. Volvo were there for the day. They've obviously made big strides to make pricing transparent. On the EV charging front, it wasn't a male-female split issue particularly, but it was a call out from the floor about someone's grandparents who had the desire and the wherewithal to move to an EV, but frankly the apps were just killing them. That was the big barrier to them. Um, you know, I,
The charging apps rather than the
yeah,
in-car.
yeah. Rather than, well, I mean, who knows? Maybe the in-car apps could equally be as challenging, but certainly the charging apps was the stated reason for not wanting to move. And I think this just gets back to diffusion of innovation. We're at the innovators' early adopter stage. That means there's a whole bunch of people, all your grandmothers, and actually the more broadly technology unconfident people. Who might see that as a barrier, and all that does is it just slows down transition. So I think, I'm not sitting here saying the world will go contactless. There's clearly a space for apps and contactless in the right space. But when we say what does effortless looks like, can I start a charge, can I pay for a charge and just get on with my day? The chart, the act of charging an EV shouldn't become an event in itself. It should always be transparent to your day. Just turn up, you plug in, you go off and do something, and that's kind of what we're aiming for.
Well, that's good. It's funny because we were talking about this beforehand, weren't we? And I was saying, my mother-in-law is in her late 70s now, and she's got a phone with apps on it, and she uses WhatsApp, and she started kind of using them during lockdown, so we'd get calls on WhatsApp, although I would sometimes see from her nose upwards like a Chad, but actually you're right, it's you can't kind of we're talking about this being an inclusive journey, aren't we? So it's got to be we've got to make it simple, like you say. It's never going to be like just going to a petrol station. I wouldn't really want that anyway because they're really smelly, and I've said that before on here. But but actually, in a petrol station, you can't just leave it and walk off and go and have a bite to eat or whatever.
Not
Whereas you
really.
can with a charge. Well, sometimes sometimes there's problems, but we need to get over those problems, don't we? That's the main thing.
Yeah, look, I would always say, people ask me in my private circles, my friend circles, about, what's it like to drive an EV? Should I think about one for the next one? And I'd always say, at least consider an EV. I think EVs are particularly good if you can charge at home, and then make access of a supercharging type network if you're driving beyond the range of your battery. I think public charging network is kind of optimized for that use case. However, if we're really to make the transition happen, we've got to deal with people who can't charge at home. Because yes, the Levi scheme will go some way to providing on-street charging. It won't be ubiquitous. It can never be. It's part of the puzzle. The workplace, I think, needs to stand up. I think people who have got access to a workplace, when a car's idle for 95% of its time, when you go to work, you park it and you leave it all day. That's clearly a place where car charging can happen. And then in between there's your kind of destinations. We've listed them before. So this kind of, it works today. 93% of people who own an EV can charge at home. That basically means we haven't really touched people who can't, and they're struggling. So how do we unlock that? And there's no one silver bullet to any of this. We are focused on one segment, destination charging, because we think that's part of the puzzle, and we just want to make it as effortless as we humanly can. So people, and actually it's great for businesses, because if you've got a great charging experience, people come back.
Yeah,
that's good for their business model. They sell another hotel room, they get another guest for the day at their leisure facility, whatever it might be.
And we've not had that opportunity before, have we, to kind of integrate charging or integrate something in addition to that kind of that consumer experience, really. And I suppose, being able to provide charging at a hotel, like you say, it will bring more people in. If you use that experience, I mean, my husband and I went to Eastbourne in January, and we went to one charger and had a major problem.
Right.
And we parked up. We just said, right, we've got enough range, we don't really need much, it's fine. And we walked past a massive hotel on the front that had some AC chargers in there, but they were not on any map systems. They weren't on Google, they were on map, kind of on they weren't on Octopus Electroverse or ZapMap or anything like that. And my husband actually popped round there, and they said, no, sorry, they're just for residents only.
But think about that for a minute. If you're booking a hotel, do you go to booking.com or do you go to ZapMap? You go to booking.com or one of the other ones. You don't for a hotel stay, unlikely you're going to stop at a hotel for en route charging. Probably better ways of charging your vehicle. But I can tell you, booking.com's now got a button where you click it, so you have your EV charger. And I've spoken to any number of hotels, and actually kind of country hubs, stroke hotels, and they've all asked, can I be found on Google? And the answer is that's where people go to look for this stuff. Booking.com. So I get it. The hotel wants to offer this as a value add service for their clients, so generally not public facing. And where was I going to go with that? Yeah, so and so it doesn't surprise me that you don't find them on ZapMap, because that's not where you go looking for a hotel. I think 80% of EV drivers will search for a hotel on the basis of if it has EV driving. I'm one of them. And then they'll make a decision. I think 40 to 50% will then make a decision on the basis of whether there's an EV charger. So it's a massive uptick. It's a value add for them. I think 6% of hotels have an EV charger in the UK. So again, right at the very start. So for the hotel, it's competitive advantage now, where frankly, in pick a time frame, 5-10 years time, if you don't have an EV charger, people are going elsewhere, potentially. Depends on the quality of your rooms and your food and the rest of it. I know it's kind of a complex service proposition, but EV charging is definitely a thing for hotels.
But what I would say with that one, and I'm not going to argue because I do get it, but they weren't advertising it anywhere. So
nowhere at all.
A guest would have rocked up and just seen the chargers in the car park. All the time we were there, we kept walking past because we were going to various places. They were just empty. They were empty. So I get your point, but actually have it on the website.
It should
advertise it. And do you know what? In some ways, you are increasing your own SEO for your business if you are having it in multiple places. So I get what you're saying about ZapMap and stuff like that, but actually you can put it on ZapMap or Electroverse and have it so that it's showing, but just showing so that it's kind of like restrictions apply.
For sure. Given what research I've seen, I would encourage hotels to, at least through the search sites, notify that they've got an EV charger available. If for no other reason, it's just going to drive more traffic to their business. Why wouldn't you? We are still relatively in the early days. These things will get ironed out in time.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's gonna take time, but like you said, it is just about making it visible, making it simple, and like you said, that's kind of what you're looking at. You said you talked about the pilots very briefly, didn't you?
I did,
Do you want to
yeah.
just talk a little bit about when you're launching and kind of, what your experience has been so far?
So, to be clear, we're manufacturing a unit. We're going to build some back office software, and clearly we've integrated our parents' company's payment capability. We have a number of units in the ground right now. I think we've got a bunch in the UK. I know we've got a bunch in the UK, and we've also got some in France, where our technical expertise resides. We'll be launching with a small number of customers, pilot customers, as we get into autumn, to do the final checks on what will look like the final manufactured specification. Clearly tooling up for a production run, you want to make sure actually it does what it says on the tin. Not only testing the electronics and the software, but actually that it all kind of hooks together. So that will inform us. So we're not, that's not just a couple of week thing that we'll be doing. We'll be working with these customers for a few months, and we'll get a lot of learning out the back of that. And then that will inform the final specification that we'll send to manufacturer. And I'm not going to put a timeline on that today, but we're not a million miles away from where we want to be. So that's what we're doing with the pilot.
I was going to say, and it's quite nice to hear it from a company that's predominantly a payment company, because that's what your background is, who are manufacturing a charger, so your payment is going to be effective. That because there are situations where payment failure is one of the things.
Yep.
Sometimes it's communications as well, but payment failure comes up quite regularly with regards to that side of things. Do you know what I mean? Doesn't it?
Well, we have to get it right. I mean, the parent companies have to get it right. I mean, if you turn up on a bus and try and tap onto a bus, it doesn't work. What are you going to do? You're going to try. They're not going to refuse you. So actually, all payment operators, of course, want to build the most reliable hardware and processes and systems. The acid test is when it's put in front of a customer that frankly has to go from A to B. Reliability clearly is a really important measure for us. I'll go back and say it, fine, start a charge and pay for a session. If you get all those things right, customers will come back.
So, with regards to kind of will they be manufactured in the UK, or will they be manufactured kind of in sort of like in Europe? Because I know that's obviously, I think, am I right? Remind me where VIX and Cuba Group are.
Well, they're global. I mean, they're not just UK businesses. I mean, between them, they work across Europe, Australia, South Africa, North America, all in the public transportation area. So, we have a complex supply chain when it comes to manufacturing the different, they're called validators, the things that you see when you walk onto a bus, but of course that integrates all the payment technology. The manufacturing of the unit is, we're very conscious of people's sustainability requirements when it comes to manufacturing kit, and certain locations are certainly falling out of favour, and shipping stuff halfway around the world is not something we're going to do. So all those things considered, it's likely that we'll build close to home, but we've not selected a final manufacturing base yet.
Okay, and so because you're destination charging, or looking at that, will you also be looking at kind of optimizing kind of fleet charging as well?
So bear in mind our expertise is around payment. Fleets generally don't require payment. So for the time being, at least in this iteration or this generation of a technology, fleet's probably difficult for us to enter. Not impossible, because clearly there are some mixed use cases. You think about the workplace actually is probably the easiest one, where you've got people, employees, visitors, etc., and potentially fleet charging. Clearly a use case that we want to address, but for the time being, the market segment we're focused on are those destinations where the business or the location wants to set a charge for charging. Now, we give them full control of the price. We're not setting the price in a traditional CPO model. We sell them the hardware and the back end and the payment process. They set the price, we do all the payment processing, return proceeds to clients, etc., etc. So That's where we're at the moment. Not to say that as we move beyond that first deployment in the UK, we don't start to think about how we can build out different use cases.
So, and what would your benchmark for success kind of look like currently, do you think?
Well, I can answer that in two ways. So one, from an EV charging perspective, if you were to put yourself 5 or 10 years out, as an EV driver, you can drive to somewhere you want to be and you'll find there's an EV charger. Now that's an industry thing rather than a VOQA specifically thing. But I think we have to get there because not everyone can charge at home, where it's convenient and often the cheapest way to charge your vehicle. So I think more businesses who think about how they can attract customers to their location by having an EV charger, they're doing a couple of things. One is increased footfall into their business, and they will know how to monetize that, be it a hotel room or be it someone shopping, whatever it might be. And they're also enabling the transition. So I think that's really important. I think for those people who are thinking about the transition, I think about it hard. There's a lot of stuff in the media that if you're not anywhere close to the industry, you'll read and take at face value. There's a lot of FUD out there, unfortunately. There's some great people doing some great things. This podcast undoubtedly is one of them, but there are lots of different places where you can get proper information. Have a serious think about whether EV is right for you. It might not be, is the answer. But the further we get into this transition, particularly with the evolution of the charging network, which clearly is running ahead, I think, of where we need it to be, the opportunity to make the switch. So, it's not a personal plea, but I guess it's think hard when you're changing your car next. So two things for me, really.
Yeah, I was going to say, and just I just want to step back a second, because when we first met, and you brought this up earlier, was your mystery shopper experience, and relating to benchmarking and what you saw for your mystery shopper. I like the way you called it that. Actually, that was quite good. What would you say was missing most out of those mystery shopper experiences then?
Payment was by far the biggest issue. Either just plainly not working. I randomly selected locations. The one thing I would say, they were all AC charging locations. I didn't pick any DC. We're trying to build a proposition for the market. So let's look at what it looks like today in the segments and proposition we're offering. So we went out looking for AC chargers. Call out to Melanie. We used ZapMap to find locations, and we just plotted a route and just went charger to charger to charger to see what the experience was. I had no idea what I was going to get into. It was a regrettably frustrating. Maybe I was just unlucky, but we did it in 2 days and we did it twice. We did it once towards where I live in Berkshire, and we did it once in Bristol, just to kind of completely separate it. And on both occasions, actually, the promise of being able to pay and then the ability to make a payment using a credit or debit card or some other contactless option just wasn't there. So that was surprising to me because, as I've said, I drive a Tesla, I charge at home. If I need to charge en route, I go to the Tesla supercharging network. I've been told by many that I'm not a real EV driver because of that. But that's what it is. So, that was to confirm, because some people around the dinner table just say, well, surely that problem's been solved. Why are you trying to resolve the problem? At least in my limited view, the problem's not solved. Now, some of that could be due to the change in rules, regulations that went in force last November. All of a sudden people are starting to build 22 kilowatt terminals with payment, and actually they've not got it integrated properly, or it doesn't work. Some did work, by the way, but not all. It just wasn't as good as it should be. So that gave me confidence that effortless charging and what we were doing was at least directionally correct, and there would be an appetite for that in the market.
Okay, and just going back, I'm going to step back to what you just said then about not being an EV driver driving a Tesla. What I would say is that if you're working for a charging company, driving a Tesla, it doesn't stop you from using the regular network, and actually it's beneficial, like you did with the mystery shopper, to be using it, because otherwise you've not got a frame of reference for what anybody else is going through. And
this was it. Otherwise we were just sitting in our own fishbowl trying to figure out what the world has as a problem. So I regularly stop in and make visits to different places now, even if I don't have to, because generally, I just do it, and
It's just my yeah, like I say, it's just my opinion. So I'm glad you do because it's
yeah,
really really about kind of like understanding, from your point of view as an EV driver, and from other people's point of view, you kind of know that the Tesla supercharger experience just works. I'm not saying the locations are always perfect, but you know that it just works. I've used it. I was driving a Tesla last year during the EV rally, so I know it works, but it is about just understanding what other people are experiencing, because when we move to that mass adoption, we're going to be talking about people who can't afford a Tesla, although Teslas are getting cheaper, aren't they, when they're used? But you know what I mean.
yeah.
That's the main thing.
I don't keep a running tally on the price of EVs, but I think the number of EVs below 30,000 now these days is growing very quickly. And let's not forget, Quinton Wilson, I think, said yesterday or was it this morning, yesterday I think it was, EVs on the second-hand market are now cheaper than their
Yeah.
petrol. And maybe that's a temporary thing until people kind of figure out actually it's a really good deal because I can potentially save money through fueling and servicing. But you know, um, price is becoming less and less of an issue. Yeah, clearly, if you want to go to top end luxury brands, you're paying a lot of money, but you're also paying a lot of money if you want to buy a top end Mercedes. I know. So I think it's becoming more possible, and I think there are certainly some advantages in the second hand market. And bear in mind, 50% of vehicles in Europe, it's probably roughly the same in the UK, 50% of vehicles end up in corporate fleet. So 50% of vehicles are making it into the kind of more consumer market. And actually, a lot of people don't buy brand new cars; they buy second-hand cars. So actually, some of the
Yeah.
barriers are going.
Was yours a new one then? Did you get a brand
Well,
new
I
car?
mean, it's a personal thing. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
I bought my first car for 500 quid when I
Oh, mine
was.
was 300. I'm beating you.
It was a Vauxhall Nova. I can even remember the registration number. I can't remember any of the others, but I can remember that one. And then I just kind of went through a series of I owned cars. That's what I felt was the thing that you needed to do. Then I eventually kind of got into hire purchase or some other form of borrowing money, and that became the thing to do. And I just virtually worked out that you're always paying for a car, and so actually now I just lease. Because I've taken the view, rightly or wrongly, that the act of owning a car means you just expose yourself to depreciation. Um,
Yeah,
uh, you know,
true.
and so as soon as I got over that mental hurdle, leasing a car for 3 or 4 years, where you've got no option to buy the car outright, but frankly, you were probably going to change your car anyway at that point. I'm fortunate that I've been able to make those decisions. I know not everyone can, but leasing is the way I went. So.
I was going to say, really, it's a bit like upgrading your phone, isn't it? You end up taking a contract out on your mobile phone, and then you get a new phone, and then you get that. So like, I have got a SIM only contract with one company, and
Yeah.
then but I have the phone through Apple, and I just have they contact me when I can upgrade if I want
Well,
to.
I always start with the ambition of buying a phone and keeping it for 10 years, but the reality is generally within the first 2 years I drop it and break it. So,
Oh God! Oh, that's why you need a hard case and one of those things on the front.
yeah,
You
or
see.
even with the hard case, I find a way of breaking things. So,
Oh, I thought that
yeah,
was just me, but yeah,
no,
I learned from my experience of smashing the screen on my iPhone, so I now have one of those rugged ice fronts. And I was also going to say my very first car was a really disgusting kind of yellowy browny Talbot Sunbeam, but I can't remember what the registration was. But yeah, it cost me 300 quid from my next door neighbour.
A353 GSA was the registration number, so that probably dates me a bit, an A-range car. Um,
Wow.
but it got me to and from Scotland. I think I did about 20,000 miles on that until it finally got towed onto the back of a scrap lorry and I sold it for 50 quid. Um, yeah, but it did me well.
You just reminded me, actually, I think the first time I ever went on a motorway was with my friend, and I had problems. There was a problem with the car, and I couldn't even take it on the motorway. So it wasn't particularly the most efficient or, lovely car. But anyway, just to start off with. So listen, let's ask a final
Yeah,
question
sure.
then. So if every driver in the UK were going to use a VOQA charger,
Yeah.
what would that, I know we've talked about this, but what would that kind of experience feel like on a daily basis?
So I hate to say it, but I'd almost hope it was transparent to them.
Mm.
You know, you arrive at somewhere that you want to be, you pull a cable out of the unit, you plug it in, you tap your card, you walk away and do what you're going to do. You're not trying to download an app, you're not trying to find an app, you're not trying to register an app, you're not trying to find the cable in your front. It's simply as you turn up, you park, you plug, you tap, you go. And so to some extent, when that person got home at night, I don't want the EV charging experience to be the topic of conversation around the table. I want them to talk about the day that they've just had it, whatever they were doing. And so that might sound a bit odd, but actually that means they had a very positive experience about the destination they were at. Because frankly, if they need or in some way require to charge at that destination, they have a really shocking destination. That colours everything. That's the first thing they get home and moan about. I couldn't charge my car and I had to stop off at 2 different places to top it up. So that's kind of how I think about it. So very much thinking through the lens of the host who will have these EV chargers. They are providing a great experience to their drivers. And it's not the EV charging facility that's driving the experience of the driver. So back to what I said, almost like we're transparent, so people want to return to the location they've just visited.
And then you're looking at the charging is just a Brucey bonus, isn't it?
It is. And, it's just there. My view on it. So I stay at a hotel in Bristol. There are some days when I'm the only EV car in a car park that can house 12 cars. There are other days I go in and there's more than half filled with EVs. Now, maybe it's particularly corporate people in their corporate cars. But, the conversation with the team at the hotel is like, this is happening in front of your eyes. People are probably trying to say, where do your drivers come from? Well, they come from London. They drive, well, that's 100 miles. Guess what? They either charge with you overnight or they have to stop on the way home. It depends on the car, etc., etc. People are searching for accommodation or hotels with EV chargers, so you need to put yourself on the map. It's going to happen. And of course, they put the toes in the water. They try a couple of bays, see what happens. But in 5 or 10 years' time, they'll be like, it's table stakes. It's a bit like you remember the days when you went to a hotel and either there was no Wi-Fi, or you had to pay for Wi-Fi.
Oh yeah, there are some of them still like that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, maybe the really tight-fisted hoteliers of the world. But
Yeah.
that's not the case now. I can't remember going to a hotel recently where Wi-Fi's not been free. I'm not saying the quality of the Wi-Fi's been brilliant, but you've got
There's
at least
that.
some Wi-Fi. Can you remember the days, you and I both probably, where you only got a mobile phone in a job if you absolutely needed a mobile phone, otherwise you weren't getting a mobile phone? Well, these days, either you're getting given a mobile phone or you're given an allowance to go and buy a mobile phone. It's just part of the package now. It's certainly in corporate world, it's just part of the package. So where we are with EV charging, we're just at the front of that. We'll go back to the days where you had to pay for Wi-Fi. Well, in time, it will become, yes, you can have EV charging. We've got it in the car park.
And if we're talking about hotels, and I'll finish in a second, but if we talk about hotels who've got ANPR cameras and they haven't got charging in there, it'd be interesting to find out if they could kind of run a survey on through the ANPR cameras about how many EV drivers actually come to their
Yeah.
or come to their hotel when they've not got EV charging. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's no perfect solution, So, if a hotel's got unlimited car parking and have electrified a few bays, they can easily say, well, only park here if you're an EV and you want to charge. Most hotels aren't in that position. They have limited charging, and if the hotels I stay in, it's part of the paid for service. I think I pay 20 quid a night to charge a car to park a car overnight in Bristol. It's quite expensive. And clearly, if they're not going to hold the bay free if someone's willing to come and do it. So I think there's a bit of give and take. There's no perfect model yet.
No.
And as we go through this transition where only some people want to charge and not everyone has an EV, but skip ahead and every bay probably, or most of the bays will be electrified. So this problem is a transitionary problem, managing supply and demand. And we can have a whole conversation with customers or potential businesses about how to prepare for the future. It's not all about what you need today, it's about what you might need in the next 3 or 4 years. Some key
Yeah.
decisions to be made on infrastructure, ordering extra power, putting civils and ducts in ahead of time so you're not you can be more efficient with your costs when you're making that initial installation. So I'm very positive about the future. Change is required. Some people will be absolutely happy with the change and run straight at it. Others will need some encouragement. I think it's the responsibility of the EV charging industry, of OEMs, of other people to remove some of the barriers that would stop people making the transition. VOQA's mission is to make EV charging effortless, and we're going to work really hard to deliver that.
Good for you. Right, well, I look forward to that. So listen, on that note, I'm going to say thank you, Euan. It's been really interesting, and I look forward to kind of seeing talking to you at an event in the future, and having a conversation about it, how it's all going. So I will share your website, the VOQA website in the show notes, and and your LinkedIn profile as well. So probably best thing, get everybody to check you out on LinkedIn and have a nosy and just see what you're offering, because it's a different, user-friendly, payment-friendly and supportive kind of charging experience that you're looking to launch anyway. So on that note, Euan, thank you ever so much for your time. It's been lovely to talk to you.
Delighted to be here. Thank you, Liz.
And sorry it's taken so long.
All right.
So to everybody else watching and listening, please like, subscribe and share all of this podcast, and have a catch up with what we've already got out there. We've got a LinkedIn page, so please have a look at the Electric Evolution LinkedIn page and all of that lovely stuff. And on that note, I will say thank you, Euan, and thanks to everyone for watching and listening. See you later. Bye.
Cheers.
Thanks for watching Electric Evolution with Liz Allan. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you're a charge point operator, local authority or stakeholder in EV charging, I'd love to talk to you about our Charge Point Evolution framework. It's designed to help you create a seamless EV driver journey, boost utilisation and maximise your return on investment. Alternatively, if you know someone who'd be a great podcast guest or might be interested in sponsoring an episode, you can email me on liz@fullcircleci.co.uk. Thanks again for watching.